The Nantahala Gorge is a place of breathtaking beauty, where the river's icy waters cut through towering cliffs and thick forests shroud the land in shadow. To the untrained eye, it might seem like a peaceful wilderness, a refuge from the chaos of the modern world. But to the Cherokee people who have called this land home for centuries, the gorge is much more than just a landscape. It is a place steeped in ancient power, where spirits linger and the past never truly dies. For generations, the Cherokee have shared stories of the supernatural forces that haunt the gorge, tales passed down from elders who warn of dangers that go unseen by those who do not know where to look. These are not just legends to them, but living memories of a time when the world was more connected to the spirit realm. The following stories are drawn from those ancient traditions, tales of terror and tragedy that still echo through the dark forests and hidden hollows of the Nantahala Gorge. As you listen, remember, the gorge is more than a place. It is alive with the memories of the past. Some are peaceful, but others are not. Let these stories be a warning for those who dare to venture too deep into the unknown. The spirits of the Nantahala are waiting, and they do not easily forgive those who trespass on sacred ground. Story 1. The Wailing Shadows of the Water. Long ago, the Cherokee lived in harmony with the land surrounding Nantahala Gorge, believing it to be a place where the spirit world and the physical world were closely intertwined. Among the most revered of the spiritual entities in the area were the Nantahala, beings who were neither fully human nor ghost, but somewhere in between, guardians of sacred places. These benevolent spirits helped the Cherokee when they were in need, warning of impending danger and sometimes even guiding lost travelers back to safety. For generations, the Nantahala were seen as protectors of the land and its people. However, everything changed when a great conflict erupted between the Cherokee and neighboring tribes. It is said that during this dark time, a small group of Cherokee sought refuge in the gorge, believing that the Nantahala would hide them from their enemies. But something went terribly wrong. A bitter disagreement among the Cherokee leaders, one rooted in betrayal and jealousy, angered the Nantahala. According to legend, one Cherokee warrior, desperate to gain power, desecrated the sacred land of the Nantahala by spilling blood upon it. This act shattered the delicate balance between the two worlds. The Nantahala, feeling betrayed, turned away from the Cherokee and abandoned their role as protectors. With the Nantahala no longer guarding the gorge, something far darker began to unfold. The spirits of the Nantahala themselves became corrupted by rage and grief. Instead of guiding the lost, they now lured them deeper into the gorge's shadowy depths. The river, once a source of life, became a harbinger of doom for those who wandered too close to its cold, dark waters. People began to hear the wailing cries of the Nantahala at night, piercing, mournful sounds that echoed through the trees and cliffs. The first modern report of a strange disappearance occurred in the early 1900s, when a family of explorers ventured into the gorge. They were experienced hikers, accustomed to the wilderness, yet something about the Nantahala unsettled them from the moment they arrived. On their second night camping near the river, they awoke to the sound of wailing cries, like the voices of women mourning their dead. The father, assuming it was an injured animal or perhaps even another group of hikers, grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. But as soon as he neared the riverbank, the cries stopped abruptly. The following morning, the man was gone. His wife and children searched for him, calling his name, but there was no response. They found only his flashlight, lying near the river, still on. His footprints led directly to the water's edge, but there were no signs of a struggle, no indication of what might have taken him. Search parties combed the area for days, but he was never found. Locals whispered that the wailing shadows had claimed another soul. As the years went on, more disappearances followed, each with eerie similarities. Hikers would report hearing the strange wails at dusk, often describing them as the cries of a woman or child in distress. Those who followed the sound into the woods or toward the river were never seen again. Survivors, the lucky few who turned back before it was too late, spoke of glimpsing shadowy figures moving through the trees, figures that vanished the moment they were spotted. Some claimed to have seen faces, pale and indistinct, staring at them from the river's surface, as if the spirits of those taken had been absorbed into the very waters of the Nantahala. And always, the wailing persisted, sometimes far in the distance, sometimes startlingly close, but always haunting. Cherokee elders warned that the Nunehai were forever cursed to haunt the gorge, trapped between the living world and the spirit realm, seeking to reclaim the lives and peace they once had. It is said that on nights when the wind howls through the gorge and the river swells with rain, the wailing of the Nunehai grows loudest, reverberating through the trees like a call from the underworld itself. And if you listen too closely, you may find yourself drawn into the shadows, never to return. Story 2. The Flame-Eyed Beast of the Gorge. Before the Nantahala Gorge became known for its towering cliffs and wild river rapids, the Cherokee spoke of a terrifying creature that called the gorge home, a monstrous serpent known as Uktena. According to Cherokee legend, the Uktena was no ordinary snake. It was as wide as a tree trunk, with scales that shimmered like molten fire in the moonlight. But the most terrifying aspect of the Uktena was its eyes, said to glow with an unholy, flame-like brilliance. Anyone who dared look into its fiery gaze would either go mad or die instantly. The story of the Uktena begins with a great battle between the Cherokee and an invading tribe. The Uktena, a powerful and ancient creature, was summoned by the tribe's shamans to protect their sacred land. It was believed that the Uktena had been created long ago as a divine guardian, but its creation was flawed. The serpent harbored an insatiable hunger for death and destruction, and over time, its loyalty to the land turned into a desire to consume everything that crossed its path. For centuries, the Uktena lay hidden in the deepest crevices of the Nantahala Gorge, stirring only when it sensed trespassers. Its eyes, burning like twin suns, could hypnotize its prey, leaving them helpless as the beast coiled around them, squeezing the life from their bodies before dragging them into its lair beneath the river. Many Cherokee warriors attempted to kill the beast, but all who tried either vanished or returned mad, their eyes burned out and their skin covered in strange burns that looked as though they had been touched by fire. The curse of the Uktena continued into the modern era. In the early 20th century, settlers and explorers began to report strange sightings in the gorge. Some claimed to see large, snake-like tracks in the mud near the river, while others described glimpsing a flash of fiery red eyes deep in the forest at dusk. Those who saw the eyes reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as though their very souls were being sucked into the creature's gaze. One of the most infamous encounters occurred in the 1920s, when a group of loggers working near the gorge began hearing strange hissing sounds at night. At first, they dismissed it as the wind through the trees, but then one night the sounds grew louder, more persistent, like the breathing of something massive lurking just out of sight. One of the loggers, a man named Tom, ventured into the woods with a lantern to investigate. Tom's fellow workers heard a blood-curdling scream, followed by the sound of thrashing branches and trees snapping. When they found him, he was barely alive, his skin covered in burns, his eyes wide with terror. He muttered incoherently about flames in the dark and a snake with fire in its eyes. Tom died the next day, but his story spread like wildfire through the logging camps. After that, no one dared to work in the gorge after dark. In the years since, there have been countless other sightings and strange occurrences. Hikers have reported seeing what they described as fireflies, glowing red dots in the distance. But as they drew closer, the dots grew larger and more menacing, like eyes watching them from the shadows. Some have even claimed to hear the Uktena's hissing, a low rumbling sound that seems to come from the earth itself, growing louder the closer one gets to the river. The Cherokee elders warn that the Uktena still lurks within the gorge, waiting for those foolish enough to wander too close to its domain. Though the creature is rarely seen in full, its presence is always felt, through the strange burns found on trees and rocks, the hissing that seems to follow those who stray from the path, and most of all, the inexplicable feeling of being watched by something ancient, hungry, and filled with fire. To this day, there are reports of missing hikers, strange lights in the woods, and a lingering sense of doom that descends upon anyone who dares venture too far into the gorge. Some say the Uktena is merely a myth, a cautionary tale to keep people from disturbing the land, but others believe the beast is very real, waiting in the shadows, its fiery eyes always searching for its next victim. Story 3: The Crying Woman of Lost Souls. The Nantahala Gorge, with its towering cliffs and rushing waters, is a place of awe and beauty, but to the Cherokee people, it is also a place of deep sorrow. For generations, they have told the story of a woman whose cries echo through the misty valleys at dawn and dusk, her soul forever wandering the rugged landscape, searching for her lost children. The story of the crying woman begins with an event so tragic, it has become woven into the very fabric of the gorge's history, a tale of betrayal, loss, and unrelenting grief. According to Cherokee legend, there was once a woman who lived peacefully with her 2 young children near the edge of the gorge. Her husband was a warrior, often away on long journeys, leaving her to tend to their home. One fateful day, her village came under attack by a rival tribe. Knowing that the warriors of her tribe were outnumbered and overwhelmed, the woman fled with her children, hoping to find safety in the dense forests and cliffs of the Nantahala Gorge. For days, she moved through the wilderness, her children clinging to her as they traversed the rough terrain. But as they reached the gorge, she realized that their pursuers were closing in. Desperate, she begged the elders and warriors who were camped near the gorge to protect her and her children. But the men, fearing that they too would be discovered and killed if they intervened, turned their backs on her. Betrayed and left to fend for herself, the woman led her children deeper into the gorge, hoping that the rugged cliffs and thick forests would hide them from their enemies. As night fell, the woman's children, exhausted and terrified, began to slow down. In the darkness, they stumbled along the narrow paths, their mother urging them forward. But the gorge is a treacherous place, and in her desperation, she made a fatal mistake. One of the children slipped and fell from the cliffside, plunging into the cold, unforgiving river below. In her panic, she reached for her second child, but he too lost his footing, disappearing into the misty darkness. Devastated and alone, the woman screamed in agony, her cries echoing off the canyon walls. She spent days searching the gorge for her lost children, her heart broken and her mind unraveling with grief. Some say she was seen by a few Cherokee hunters wandering the cliffs and calling out their names. Her hair had become matted with dirt, her clothes tattered, and her eyes hollow with despair. But no matter how far she searched, the gorge offered no return for the souls it had claimed. As time passed, the woman's cries faded into legend, but the Cherokee believed her spirit remained. The betrayal by her people and the loss of her children bound her to the gorge in death as surely as it had in life. They say that on misty mornings, just as the first light of dawn touches the river's surface, you can hear her cries rising with the mist. The sound is haunting, mournful, as if the gorge itself is weeping for the souls lost within its depths. Her wails carry on the wind, and those who hear them feel a cold chill settle over them, as though the air itself is heavy with sorrow. For centuries, travelers through the gorge have reported hearing the crying woman, though few dare to follow her voice. Those who have ventured too close to the source of the cries tell of feeling an overwhelming sense of grief and loss. Some say they have seen a pale figure standing at the edge of the cliffs, her arms outstretched as if searching for something just out of reach. Others claim to have seen her standing in the shallow waters of the river, staring into its depths as though expecting her children to rise from the dark currents below. One of the most chilling encounters happened in the 1970s when a young couple was camping near the gorge. They had heard the legends, but dismissed them as mere superstition, nothing more than ghost stories to scare tourists. On their second night, they were woken by the sound of soft crying coming from the river below their campsite. At first, they thought it might be an animal, but as the crying grew louder, it became clear that it was a woman's voice, filled with anguish. Curious, the man decided to investigate, leaving his tent with a flashlight. As he approached the river, the crying seemed to move farther away, leading him deeper into the forest. He followed the sound for nearly an hour, growing more uneasy with every step. The trees closed in around him, and the mist thickened, obscuring his path. Finally, he reached the edge of a cliff and saw her, a pale figure standing on the rocks, her long dark hair flowing in the wind, her face obscured by the mist. She stood perfectly still, but the crying continued, echoing all around him. The man called out to her, asking if she needed help, but she did not respond. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward him, and though he couldn't see her face clearly, he felt a wave of sorrow so intense that it nearly knocked him off his feet. He backed away, terrified, and as he did, the woman stepped forward, disappearing into the mist. He turned and ran back to his campsite, his heart pounding in his chest, convinced that he had just encountered the crying woman of the Nantahala Gorge. In the years since, there have been many similar sightings. Hikers and campers report hearing the same eerie cries, always at dawn or dusk, and always near the river or cliffs. Some claim that the crying woman has tried to lure them toward the edge, her voice filled with a desperation that is impossible to ignore. A few have even reported feeling an invisible force pulling at them, as if she is trying to drag them into the gorge with her, to share her eternal sorrow. Cherokee elders warn that the crying woman's grief is so powerful that it can consume those who listen too long. They believe that her spirit, bound to the gorge by the loss of her children, is cursed to wander the cliffs and riverbanks forever, searching for what she cannot find. They tell of men who have been driven mad after hearing her cries, haunted by dreams of her pale face and empty eyes, and of those who have been found dead at the bottom of the cliffs, their bodies broken on the rocks below, as if they had been lured to their deaths by her sorrowful wails. To this day, the crying woman remains one of the most enduring and terrifying legends of the Nantahala Gorge. Whether her spirit is real or simply a manifestation of the deep grief that the gorge holds, one thing is certain: those who hear her cries never forget them. Her sorrow seeps into their bones, her wails echo in their minds long after they leave the gorge, and some say her cries are a warning, a reminder of the tragedy that still lingers in the misty depths of the Nantahala. Story 4: The Curse of the Blood Moon. The Cherokee people have long believed that the Nantahala Gorge is more than just a striking natural feature. Its towering cliffs and deep, shadowy forests are said to be a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur. Among the most feared events in the gorge's dark history is the rising of the blood moon, an ominous celestial phenomenon that occurs only rarely. According to legend, the appearance of the blood moon signals a night when the spirit world spills over into the land of the living, awakening forces that are best left undisturbed. The story of the blood moon curse dates back to a time when the Cherokee were at war with neighboring tribes. During one particularly brutal conflict, a group of Cherokee warriors sought refuge in the deepest parts of the Nantahala Gorge. Desperate and running low on supplies, the warriors realized that their only hope for survival lay in summoning the powerful spirits of the gorge to aid them. Under the guidance of a shaman, they decided to perform a forbidden ritual, one that would invoke the spirits of the dead and grant them victory in battle. The ritual was performed on the night of a blood moon, a rare and powerful event when the moon takes on a deep crimson hue. According to the shaman, the blood moon was a time of great power, when the spirits of ancestors could be called upon for guidance or revenge. But there was a price for disturbing the dead, and the shaman warned the warriors that the ritual should never be completed. If it was, the spirits would not only grant their request but also extract a terrible toll. Blinded by their desperation, the warriors ignored his warning and continued the ritual, calling forth the spirits with chants and offerings of blood. As the blood moon rose higher in the sky, the wind began to howl through the gorge, and the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. The ground trembled beneath the warriors' feet, and the once quiet forests around them came alive with the sound of rustling leaves and distant whispers. The shaman, realizing too late the gravity of what they had done, tried to stop the ritual, but the warriors refused to listen. They demanded that the spirits grant them the power to defeat their enemies and protect their people. Suddenly, the air grew still. The blood-red moon seemed to pulse with an eerie light, casting long shadows across the gorge. Then, from the darkness, the spirits answered. Rising from the earth, the spirits of long-dead warriors appeared, their faces twisted with rage and their eyes glowing with the same crimson light as the moon above. These were not the benevolent ancestors the warriors had hoped to summon. They were vengeful spirits, angered by the warriors' arrogance and their defiance of sacred law. One by one, the spirits turned on the warriors who had summoned them, It is said that the men's cries echoed through the gorge as they were dragged screaming into the shadows, their bodies never to be seen again. The shaman, the last to witness the massacre, tried to flee, but the spirits surrounded him, their eyes burning with fury. Before they claimed his life, he cursed the warriors for their folly, declaring that their spirits too would be trapped in the gorge forever, bound to the land by their betrayal of the natural order. When the sun rose the next morning, the blood moon had faded, but the horror left behind remained. The bodies of the warriors were gone, but strange markings were found on the trees and rocks around the ritual site, symbols of death and warning etched deep into the stone as if by unseen hands. The Cherokee elders, upon learning of what had happened, decreed that the gorge was now a cursed place. They warned that during future blood moons, the spirits of the warriors and those they had summoned would rise again, seeking revenge on any who dared to disturb them. Over the centuries, this legend became ingrained in the lore of the gorge. The blood moon became a time of fear, a night when even the bravest hunters and warriors would refuse to enter the gorge. Some whispered that the spirits were still waiting for those who had escaped their wrath, while others believed that the curse was growing stronger with each passing generation, feeding on the blood spilled in the gorge over the years. In modern times, the legend of the blood moon has been largely forgotten by those outside the Cherokee community. But every few years, when the moon turns red and casts its eerie light over the gorge, strange events are reported. Hikers and campers speak of a palpable sense of dread that descends over the area, a feeling as if they are being watched by unseen eyes. Some have claimed to hear the faint sound of drums beating in the distance, a rhythmic, ominous pulse that grows louder as the night deepens. One particularly chilling incident occurred during a blood moon in the early 1980s. A group of college students, unfamiliar with the local legends, decided to camp in the Nantahala Gorge, hoping to take advantage of the rare celestial event. They pitched their tents near the river and spent the evening drinking and laughing, completely unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. As the moon rose and turned red, one of the students, a young man named David, noticed a strange figure standing at the edge of the forest. He pointed it out to his friends, but when they turned to look, the figure was gone. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, the group continued their revelry. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The temperature dropped suddenly and the wind picked up, howling through the trees with an almost unnatural force. The fire they had built flickered and went out, leaving them in darkness. Then came the sound of drums, faint at first, but growing louder and more insistent. Nervous, the group huddled together, unsure of what was happening. David, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity, grabbed a flashlight and ventured toward the forest where he had seen the figure earlier. His friends called after him, but he ignored them, determined to prove that there was nothing to be afraid of. As he approached the trees, the drumming grew louder, almost deafening, and he could see faint glowing figures moving in the distance, their eyes burning red like the moon above. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped out of the darkness, a tall, gaunt figure clad in the tattered remains of a Cherokee warrior's clothing. Its eyes locked onto David, and in that moment, he felt a wave of cold terror wash over him. The figure raised its hand and the drumming stopped. In the deafening silence that followed, David felt an invisible force pulling him toward the figure, dragging him deeper into the forest. His friends, hearing his panicked screams, ran after him, but by the time they reached the edge of the forest, David was gone. They searched for him for hours, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. The police were eventually called and a search party combed the area for days, but David was never found. The only clue to his disappearance was his flashlight, found lying near the base of a tree, still on, its beam pointing toward the river. Since that night, there have been numerous reports of strange sightings during blood moons. Visitors to the gorge speak of seeing ghostly figures moving through the trees, their eyes glowing red, their bodies cloaked in shadow. Others have heard the unmistakable sound of drums beating in the distance, as if calling out to the spirits of the dead. Some claim to have seen faces, pale and twisted, staring at them from the darkness, only to vanish when they get too close. The Cherokee elders still warn against venturing into the gorge on the night of a blood moon. They believe that the spirits of the cursed warriors and the vengeful dead continue to rise during these nights, forever bound to the land by the curse they unleashed. Those who ignore the warnings risk not only their lives but their souls. for the spirits of the blood moon are said to be insatiable, always searching for new victims to drag into the shadows of the gorge. The blood moon is a reminder of the dangers of disturbing the natural order, of invoking powers that should be left alone, and for those who dare to enter the Nantahala Gorge during this cursed time, the consequences can be deadly as the spirits of the past rise once more, seeking vengeance under the blood-red sky. Story 5. The Phantom Drums of the Dark Hollow. Deep within the heart of the Nantahala Gorge, there is a place few dare to enter, Dark Hollow, a secluded, shadowy ravine surrounded by towering cliffs and thick forests. The Cherokee people believe that this hollow is one of the most sacred and dangerous places in their ancestral lands, a place where the veil between the physical world and the spirit world is thinnest. Long ago, the Cherokee held sacred ceremonies in Dark Hollow, rituals meant to honor the spirits of the land and their ancestors. But something terrible happened there, something that turned this once holy place into a cursed ground where the restless dead roam and the sound of phantom drums haunts the night. The story begins hundreds of years ago when Dark Hollow was a place of peace and reverence for the Cherokee. The elders would lead the people in ritual dances and prayers to the spirits, asking for blessings, protection, and guidance. These ceremonies were deeply spiritual, performed with the utmost respect for the land and the unseen forces that inhabited it. The Cherokee believed that the spirits of their ancestors, as well as the Nunahai, the protective spirits of the land, dwelled within Dark Hollow, and through these rituals, they could maintain harmony between the physical world and the spirit realm. But this harmony was shattered during a time of great turmoil. European settlers had begun encroaching on Cherokee lands, and tensions between the two groups were rising. The settlers, unfamiliar with Cherokee customs and spiritual beliefs, saw the rituals performed in Dark Hollow as primitive and threatening. As the Cherokee fought to protect their lands from invasion, the settlers grew more hostile, determined to drive them from their sacred places. One night, during a particularly important ceremony in Dark Hollow, disaster struck. The Cherokee had gathered to perform a ritual dance meant to call upon the spirits for protection against the settlers, who had begun attacking villages and burning crops. The dance was long and intense, with drums beating a rhythmic pulse that echoed through the forest. The dancers moved in a circle around a great fire, their faces painted, their voices chanting prayers in the Cherokee tongue. The elders believed that if they performed the dance perfectly, the spirits would rise to defend the land from the invaders. As the ceremony reached its climax, a group of settlers armed with muskets and torches stormed into the hollow. They had heard rumors of the Cherokee gathering, and, fearing an attack, decided to strike first. The settlers saw the dancing figures in the flickering firelight and mistook the sacred ritual for an act of war. Without warning, they opened fire, their gunshots cutting through the night like thunder. Panic erupted in the hollow as the dancers fell, the drums suddenly silenced, and the chanting turned into screams. The settlers, driven by fear and hatred, showed no mercy. They slaughtered everyone in their path, men, women, and children, leaving the ground soaked with blood. The fire, once a symbol of spiritual connection, was extinguished in the chaos, leaving the hollow in darkness. When the last Cherokee fell, the settlers, realizing the horror of what they had done, fled into the night, leaving behind the bodies of the dead and the sacred ground desecrated. But the spirits of Dark Hollow did not rest. In the days that followed, the Cherokee elders who had not been present at the massacre gathered at the edge of the hollow to mourn the dead. They performed rituals to cleanse the land and to call upon the spirits to guide the souls of the fallen into the afterlife. But something had changed in the hollow. The air was thick with a malevolent energy, and strange things began to happen. At night, those who ventured near the hollow reported hearing the sound of drums, faint at first, but growing louder as they drew closer. Some said they heard voices chanting in the Cherokee language, though no one was there. Others claimed to see shadowy figures moving among the trees, their faces obscured, but their presence undeniable. The elders realized that the spirits of the dancers had not moved on. They were trapped in the hollow, bound to the land by the violence that had been done to them. The sacred ritual, interrupted so violently, had become a curse. Over time, Dark Hollow became a place of fear and dread. The Cherokee people, once so connected to the spirits of the land, now avoided the hollow, warning their children never to go near it. The settlers, too, began to fear the place after several of their own disappeared while trying to explore the area. Those who did return told terrifying stories of ghostly drums and shadowy dancers who moved in a never-ending circle, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Some settlers claimed that the spirits of the dancers would try to lure them into the circle, their voices soft and pleading, begging for release from the curse that bound them. In one particularly chilling account from the late 1800s, a hunter named Jacob, unaware of the hollow's dark history, ventured into the gorge in search of game. As night fell, he set up camp near Dark Hollow, drawn by the secluded beauty of the place. He built a fire and settled in for the night, but soon began to feel uneasy. The wind seemed to whisper through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of drums. At first, Jacob thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him, but the drumming grew louder, more rhythmic, as if coming from deep within the forest. Curious and unnerved, Jacob grabbed his rifle and cautiously made his way toward the sound. As he approached the hollow, the drumming reached a fever pitch, and he began to hear voices chanting in a language he did not understand. The trees around him seemed to close in, their branches swaying in time with the beat of the drums. Finally, he reached the edge of the hollow and stopped dead in his tracks. Before him in the clearing was a circle of ghostly figures. They moved in perfect unison, their bodies swaying to the beat of the phantom drums. Though their faces were shadowed, Jacob could see the faint glow of their eyes like embers in the night. The figures danced around a ghostly fire, their movements graceful, yet haunting. Jacob watched, frozen in place, as one of the figures turned toward him, its eyes locking onto his. For a moment he felt as though he was being pulled into the circle, his feet inching forward against his will. Just as he was about to step into the hollow, the drumming stopped abruptly, and the figures vanished into thin air. The forest fell deathly silent, and Jacob found himself alone in the darkness. Trembling, he turned and ran back to his camp, never looking back. The next morning he packed up and left the gorge, vowing never to return. He told his story to anyone who would listen, but few believed him, until others began to report similar encounters. In the years since Jacob's experience, countless others have heard the phantom drums of Dark Hollow. Some claim to have seen the ghostly dancers, their forms flickering in and out of existence like shadows cast by an unseen fire. Others have felt a cold presence watching them from the trees, as if the spirits of the fallen dancers are still searching for someone to complete the ritual that was so violently interrupted. A few brave souls have tried to investigate the hollow, but most return with only stories of fear and regret. Some never return at all. The Cherokee elders continue to warn against entering Dark Hollow, especially at night. They believe that the spirits of the dancers are trapped in a never-ending loop, cursed to repeat their final dance for all eternity. The drums, they say, are a call to the living, a lure that draws the curious into the hollow, where the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead no longer exists. To this day, the sound of phantom drums can still be heard in the Nantahala Gorge, especially on cold, clear nights when the moon is high and the air is still. The hollow remains a place of mystery and fear, a reminder of the violence that once stained the land and the spirits that still roam, bound by a ritual left unfinished and a curse that may never be broken.